Hello, everyone. It's another Federal Tax Update podcast. It's Roger Harris and Annie Schwab back with you. Annie, how are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Tax season's kicking off, and we're here to share some news.
Right. As we sit here today and recording this, tax season has started, and at least for 36 hours, things seem to be going well. We haven't had any issues that we're aware of in the first 36 hours. We're really excited today to have a guest join Annie and I. And Annie, why don't you tell everybody who we're fortunate to have with us today?
Sure. I have the pleasure of having Annette Nellen here with us today. She is a CPA, an attorney, and a professor of the graduate program in San Jose State University. And she is also chair of the Internal Revenue Service Advisory Council. So please welcome Annette Nellen.
Annette, welcome. Glad to have you. Thank you.
Well, thank you for having me, and looking forward to it. Just want to note, I chaired IRSAC in 2024. We've got a new chair for 2025.
Yeah, you're like me now. And I share the ability to have served on IRSAC and chaired it, so we're both has-beens now. We're both long and forgotten, but we're not going to let you completely get away from it. You know, with Annette's, a lot of you may have heard her in other settings, and we're just thrilled she's joining us on this podcast. But one of the things that we thought we would do, even though she's not officially the chair of IRSAC, is IRSAC, as some of you may know, issues an annual report to Congress on what they see are the issues with regard to the IRS and what actions should be taken and suggestions. And even though she's not officially on IRSAC, we thought we'd look back to that report because it's got some interesting things in it. Some of the things go back as far as when I was chair that were in our report. You know, some things never go away. And as we sit here today in a new administration, a lot of the things that were said in that IRSAC report kind of are in a different light today. And so we're just going to ramble on and talk about our opinions on how it's there. So, Annette, again, thank you for being here. Talk a little bit about, give people better than I did an explanation as to what this annual report actually is and the amount of work it takes to put it together. People don't appreciate the amount of work it takes to put this report together.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. One thing I've noted in my career of being on various committees, and we probably have all experienced this, some are a lot of work. I'm on another advisory board in
Nice.
California, and we pretty much just sit and listen. We can suggest ideas. So it's always important if you're going to volunteer for something, because volunteering for IRSAC, and you apply. It is a 3-year term, but actually I'm in my 3rd year of being on IRSAC. It's kind of unusual to have chaired it in my 2nd year as opposed to my 3rd year. So I'm actually still on the IRSAC and glad to be there. It's a great opportunity to, serve, presenting ideas for improving our the administrative side of our tax system. Also just a great learning experience. There are today there's actually 37 members on IRSAC with just a variety of background. There's people who are pension plan experts. There are people who are experts on the special tax rules for Indian tribes, people in practices with all different types of clients and sizes of clients, people involved in information reporting. So you learn a lot from your colleagues, as well as learning a lot in identifying and developing issues to get to the point of making recommendations. And IRSAC's been around for several decades, and it is advisory to the IRS commissioner, and it's just a good opportunity. But it is a working group. We meet in person a few times a year. We have many virtual meetings, and it's a good learning experience. I think the report, which gets released in November at a public meeting, the report itself is, I think, quite educational. And I always learn a lot, even reading like the ETAC reports, the National Taxpayer Advocate reports. They've got a lot of really good background information, which isn't always readily available. So it's not just the issues they're raising, the recommendations, but a lot of times just the background in the report to learn about many more things. I think one of the things we're going to talk about was our funding report. And it's about the tax gap. And I have run into practitioners like, what's the tax gap? Well, no, that's probably important to know what the tax gap is.
You might want to know what that means.
So I think it's a good read. The report for 2024 is fairly long. We had a good number of issues, very active members. And then something we did start in 2023 with the release of the IRS strategic operating plan, mapping the recommendations to that plan, saying, well, obviously this is how it's focused, how the IRS is focused on the issues it's developing. How do these recommendations from the volunteer IRSAC committee feed into that? So I encourage people to take a look, reading all or part of it. It's available on the IRS website. You just do a search for IRSAC, IRSAC. It should come right up, and you even see reports of the last 20 years.
Right. Yeah, you can probably find the one that my group worked on years ago.
Right.
And it's shocking, like you said, there's issues that are on the report nearly every year, and then one year you'll have something very different, something new, something urgent, something that has just occurred. And so it is interesting to compare reports from year to year.
Yeah, see what has had a long life, and which I guess I don't know if that means the problem is still there or if it's always going to be there. But a lot of good people, I know being on IRSAC changed my whole perspective of it, of a lot of things whether it relates to the tax system, getting to to work with people. And you definitely work with the commissioner. In fact, it used to be called the Commissioner's Advisory Group before its name was changed. And so therefore, to some extent, the commissioners are different. So they take the reports differently. They participate differently. But I've found for the most part, the members I know work very hard. And I think the IRS takes it probably very seriously. Don't know if I can say the same for Congress, but I think the commissioner and the IRS pay very close attention to it. And a lot of people in Congress do. But I think the reason some of those issues are still there is that they don't always
get resolved.
So let's jump into the report, because again, when we first asked Annette to do this and the report had just come out, I think had we recorded this podcast then, it would be a little different than what we're going to comment today. But let's start by, if you don't mind, Annette, talking about one of the first things that's in the report, and we'll comment on it then, is the whole idea of IRS funding. Because again, this has been something that I know has been in the report since I did it, about the need for proper and consistent funding. So talk a little bit about what IRSAC said, and then we'll try to move into how that may be changing in our current environment.
Sure. And I do want to just note, I'm speaking on behalf of myself. Yes, I'm a member of IRSAC, but I'm not speaking for IRSAC. But I appreciate the opportunity, because I think a lot of people just really aren't that familiar with the variety of reports that are out there. Before we get into more detail, Roger, I'm guessing you also look at a lot of reports like TIGDA and GAO and CBO, all kinds of reports come out, which, being an academic, I can have more time to look at these things, and they tie to my research and my teaching. And I do, at times try to find ways to, how can I share that via updates or blog posts or things for, obviously busy practitioners. It's enough just to keep up with the tax law and get your clients' needs taken care of and all that. But there's just an enormous number of reports. IRSAC is just another one there where we do make recommendations to the IRS. If you look back prior reports of IRSAC, almost always there was what's called a general report tied to funding. And, once you start talking about funding, I think you have to keep on talking about funding, because otherwise it could be perceived as, oh, they don't talk about funding, maybe everything's fine. And obviously all government agencies always have a funding concern here. The topic focus in the IRSAC report for 2024 is actually on the tax gap, which has, as long as there's a tax system, there's always going to be a tax gap. It exists at the federal level, at the state and local levels. And basically what the definition of a tax gap is, it's if all taxes were paid properly and on time versus what actually is collected. That differential is the tax gap. Now, some of that that's the gross tax gap. Some gets lowered by, IRS, and at the state level, the state agencies, their enforcement efforts, and people, maybe just need to get into payment plans to get their taxes paid. But it can be a large number at the federal level. It's around, 600 billion plus, which is actually greater than what the corporate income tax brings in. So it's a significant number. And it's it represents dollars that are, already in the law. It's not like, to collect it, we have to pass new, raise rates or something.
Right.
It's taxes already on the books. And it represents that we have about an 85% compliance rate. And I think if a lot of people don't know that, they might not be aware of, well, what's being done to collect that other 15%? I'm
Right.
fully compliant. Shouldn't other people
I gotta
be
pay
fully
mine.
compliant as well?
Yeah.
Right.
Why isn't everybody paying?
Right. So the report, explains some background about the tax gap, because again, I think, even a good number of people in the tax field might not fully know what the tax gap is, but I think it's important to understand that any effort to try and collect the tax gap, and over the decades, we've seen things like, why is there a 1099-K in existence? Well, part of that was, if we have information reporting, it's a revenue raiser because more dollars will come in. It's not new dollars, not a new, like, oh, something became
It
taxable.
encourages.
Yeah, it's just reporting current income.
Yeah.
So it's been well known. I mean, if you look at GAO reports, even back to the 70s, they've had a variety of ideas, which they still talk about today, of how to collect these dollars. I think it comes down to greater tax understanding or literacy. Information reporting has been proven to show that, yes, that helps in reporting. Withholding also helps in getting people to file. I mean, wage earners are the most compliant group. I think it's like 98% compliance rate among wage earners, because they have information reporting as well as withholding. But that's not true of all types of income. Plus, a tax gap can be caused by people either intentionally or unintentionally claiming deductions or exclusions that they're not entitled to, misclassifying income. So the IRSAC report explains a little bit more about the tax gap and some of the data that has been reported for years and gets updated annually. The IRS has been updating the tax gap information more regularly in recent years, and then making recommendations, including IRS maybe should better share this information. I mean, there's a web page about the tax gap, but I don't know how many people go and search out the IRS website to look at the tax gap information. So that was one recommendation, see how you could better promote it, including like through social media, maybe information that's included in, I'm not sure how many people read instructions to tax forms or put it as hey, like on a website. This one just came to mind on their IRS website. Hey, did you know that, this is a problem here? Another recommendation was that make sure it's just like one web page where you can go to get all of the information. But all it was just encouraging the IRS to better share, more widely share the information about the tax gap, because I mean, personally, I think if more people knew about it, they would be saying, yeah, don't we need to have the IRS go out and do audits to find people who aren't paying their taxes? Because I pay mine, shouldn't everybody else pay theirs as well?
Well, and when you hear the stuff in the news media about people who want to abolish the IRS, I think first of all, that's kind of a silly thing to say, but I think to your point, if they appreciate the fact that 15% of the people aren't paying their tax, and the purpose of the IRS is to try to make everybody play at the same level, that, I don't care what tax system we have, there's always going to be some people who don't comply and don't pay or don't have the knowledge. So the tax gap is kind of a judge of how our voluntary tax system is working. And 85%, in a voluntary system is probably not bad, unless you're one of the 85% and you want the other 15 to step up to the plate and do the same thing that we're doing.
Of like, do you want more enforcement or less enforcement? And you hear both sides. I don't want people knocking on my door, but on the other hand, I also don't want people getting away without paying taxes. You're really hurting the system as a whole. So that's, what do you think? How do you think IRS enforcement is going to go? I know there was a lot of funding, but now maybe not.
Yeah, I think it's many things. And actually, I guess you'll never get the tax gap down to zero. I remember reading a GAO report a long time ago where they said it's kind of a balance between how intrusive you want to be to get every single penny, which isn't what they were recommending. But, obviously having some fairness, and everybody is subject to, paying tax on how their income is defined. Of course, talking about the tax gap, I mean, the IRSAC report is background about the federal tax gap, which comes from IRS, GAO, and other reports. But if people probably ought to check what's collected, what kind of data is collected at the state level in their state about the tax gap, because they might be again surprised at the state level. It exists for every kind of a tax.
Oh yeah,
but yeah, it's a
sales
combination.
Tax, property tax, all of them.
Yeah, and the IRSAC report also is emphasizing that it's a combination of both adequate taxpayer services, because if somebody has a question about something and getting it answered correctly is going to help make them file correctly, that's good. And also, of course, enforcement. And that's true at all levels of government that collect taxes. So you've got to have, some way that people can understand the tax law. Because, some of the tax gap is unintentional non-compliance of some sort. I mean, it's just complicated.
Yeah.
Right.
No, it is. And unintentional or intentional, it's still $1 missing. And you mentioned third-party reporting, which we also have to realize that third-party reporting really is effective in reducing the tax gap. But just like enforcement doesn't want to be intrusive, there's a level of how much third-party reporting. I mean, we could theoretically require every transaction to be reported to the IRS, and that would probably close the tax gap, but small business and individuals would go crazy because of the burden it would put on them and the amount of time they would have to spend just to try to theoretically close the tax gap with third-party reporting. But it's clearly effective. You mentioned wage earners. The reason they pay more than everybody else is because everybody knows what they earn. I mean, there's no...
It's right there. It's transparent.
And I'm also amazed by some people who ask the question, well, does the IRS know about this, as if that's some sort of measurement as to whether it's taxable or not. The fact that there's third-party reporting or not third-party reporting has nothing to do with whether you're supposed to report it whether it's taxable. It's just whether the IRS has in their system the information to do some sort of matching against your return. But I can't believe how many times we get asked, well, does the IRS know I earned it? Or, well, why are you asking? Because that's kind of irrelevant.
Right.
But it's a big thing, and we'll touch on it if we have time. And I'm going to remind everybody what you said earlier. We're all sitting here in some cases talking about things that aren't IRSAC directly related. We're giving opinions on the current environment. But when the whole 1099K change came about reporting, the $600 level and, grandma's yard sales getting reported through Venmo and things like that, that's a great example of where information that was always, or transactions that always need to be reported, will now start being reported because there's third-party information, not because how their tax has changed.
Right. The laws haven't changed. It's just that now there's reporting.
Right. Right. And you bring up a good point. I mean, we've all seen this for decades and continue to do so, of people thinking, well, I didn't get a 1099 or a W-2, it must be tax-free. I mean, I think that's a pretty wide understanding, because, so far as tax education, is a topic I try to spend a fair amount of time on, tax literacy, and trying to see what can be done. Because, for most like high school students, their first lesson on taxes is their first paycheck.
Exactly.
Where's all my money? That's unfortunate that something is so important that isn't really covered. I think the only people ever take a tax course are accounting majors. They take one tax
business school majors, I
mean, I think you look at any college curriculum, look at what the finance majors study, even if they have an entrepreneurship program, probably doesn't cover taxes. When obviously that's a very significant item there. So that's another challenge for the tax gap, is that we just have low understanding. And, something interesting in the most recent National Taxpayer Advocate report that came out, where they have to list the 10 most serious tax problems, they have added tax literacy as one of the problems, which personally I'm glad to see, because it's almost kind of unfair that we don't talk about how the tax system works. In California, where I am, there are often some pretty significant tax measures on the ballot. I mean, twice in California we voted on in the past, how should multi-state business income be apportioned? That's a complicated topic. It was on the ballot. For people who, have got no tax understanding, which is, personally, I think they're kind of being cheated by not getting some exposure to how the tax system works, both from a policy perspective as well as their own tax. I mean, you've got, I'm sure a good number of individuals who would be eligible to set up an IRA account. That would be very beneficial,
but they don't
know about that.
Yeah. Well, and some of the tax practitioners are not keeping up with their education and what's happening and what's new and proper reporting. I mean, I've reviewed tax returns that have errors, blatant errors, and that's also difficult too. There's got to be some sort of
balance, on both
balance.
sides.
Yeah.
And that's really complexity. I mean, here, San Jose State, I run a graduate tax program where
Right.
it exists mainly because the complexity of the tax
The
law.
complexity.
You need to know how to do tax research, have a really strong foundation of many parts of the law, so you can continue to grow from that. But it just the complexity of the tax law. And you see attorneys do the same thing. They'll often get an LLM in tax. There's other LLMs out there, but the most common one anybody would get would be an LLM, a master's in law in tax.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the IRS, because the tax law is so complex, and it takes challenges to educate people, to enforce it, to collect it, to do all those things, they get blamed when I think the real core problem is the complexity of the law, that a simpler law is easier to enforce, it's easier to collect, it's easier to educate. But we put all the blame on the IRS, and yet a lot of it could be solved if Congress gave us simpler laws that made life a little easier.
For
but
sure.
I don't know that that's going to happen. And when you mention tax literacy, I'm a huge sports fan, and one of the things that I keep waiting to happen is with all these new athletes getting all this name, image, and likeness money for the last couple of years, what amount of education are they being given as they get this money, and what their obligations are to pay and track what's a deductible, what's not deductible? Because we now have, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of athletes getting some sort of money in college, and yet I just don't know if the education is following up on the money.
Yeah, I do know that often they do track down maybe the tax professor or someone to see if they'll give an overview for the students. And for the students, probably the bigger issue that they've got, not federal, is actually the multi-state.
Right.
Because where are they domiciled? Where was it they earned? Oh, I was playing a game over in another state and did something, and they paid me money.
And the professional athletes know that. They know that if they play a game in New York, they got to pay taxes in New York, even if they're on the LA team. And then, there's just some common things that you hear in the news where the quarterback got $1 million and gave $10,000 to his offensive lineman to thank them for what they do. Now, is that a deduction? And if so, how do you claim it? There's just so many things that, that I just wondered if we're going to hear all these horror stories 2 or 3 years down the road of athletes that didn't go seek out the professor, and all of a sudden now the IRS is tracking them down for that $1 million NIL deal that they got, and they never thought they had to report it because they probably didn't. At that stage in my life, I wouldn't have grown up knowing anything about taxes. I just thought this was the greatest thing in the world. So
basically what you're saying is I have really good job security, right?
Yeah.
I think the more complex the system gets, the better my job security gets.
Yeah. A challenge of the complexity, though, is also then always, is it right? Did I miss something?
Yeah. Now, and again, you can speak for IRSAC or you can speak for Annette. Funding is such I call it a pendulum with the IRS. They get money, then they get it taken away. And, how important is money to the IRS doing their job? I was in D.C. last week, and one of the things I reminded some people of is if you don't fund the IRS, then every excuse for every problem is we didn't have the money. And so it's hard to really dig into what the real problem is because they just say we didn't have the money, and that's where the discussion ends. If we fund them properly, I think it's easier to hold them accountable for delivering the service that we expect of them, because we take away the excuse you didn't have the money to do it, which is what we always hear. We're in a situation now where they got a bunch of money a few years ago in the Inflation Reduction Act. Now it looks, we've already seen some of that taken away, more taken away. How important is funding, consistent funding to any agency? But let's talk about it from the IRS. If we want our tax system to work, can we get that? I guess we can always get it cheaper, but what's your feeling about IRS funding. I think IRSAC may have even talked about it, but what's Annette's feeling on, what's the right thing to do when it comes to funding and the impact of probably not funding?
Yeah. Well, one thing that is noted in IRSAC report, just a lot of background information, is the IRS does collect 96% of government revenues, which means the government needs that money to operate. And, if all the money doesn't come in and they want to lower the deficit and the debt, you'll see Congress, we'll have a tax increase of some sort, where it's like, okay, well, why not effort to try and collect the tax already on the books? I mean, something that's pushed for in blogs and articles for some time. I think the National Taxpayer Advocate reports over the years have done a good job of showing the importance of funding. I know one report back a few years ago talking about what the IT budget was for the IRS versus what it might be for a single, big bank, saying, well, if the bank is taking this to serve a much smaller customer base than what the IRS has, what do you expect the IRS could actually do? So I think there's some good reports there. Plus, I know I've read in the past, the GAO gives a report where, which agencies have the oldest technology. It's always like Department of Defense and the IRS at the top of the list. It's a big deal to, upgrade any technology, but it needs to be done with not with your annual allocation. Hey, see if you can put a little bit off to slowly over 10 years or so improve your technology, because by the time you get that improved, the next technology has come out there. So yeah, I think National Taxpayer Advocate has done a good job over the years of highlighting the importance of, you've got to have some one-time funding to just modernize
like a special assessment system or something to just do it all at one time. I did notice some really great improvements though over the last, I guess, year and a half to 2 years with online accounts and being able to, respond to notices online. Even customer service, I think, improved. The time, the wait times had improved. Is it great? Is it perfect? No. Yeah. But progress. I mean, I feel like a lot of people have noticed progress. Unfortunately, without funding, there's not going to be much more progress. But
yeah, and I'm sure there's with any agency, there's always more to be done. But with advances in technology, I think going rather quickly in recent years.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Plus, you've got now Gen Z. Like they're recent college grads at about that age, they grew up tech dependent, so they expect a certain thing. Like if you told them, "Oh, you've got to go find an envelope, print this off," but they don't own a printer, and mail this, to Social Security, or you're going to mail this to them. They're like, "What are you talking about? I know
a real signature, not a signature."
Yeah, tell them to write a check. What's that?
Right, that's right.
Do they even have one? They probably don't even have one.
Yeah, several yeyears ago, opening an account in, I was actually in Canada. My daughter was going to school in Vancouver for a bit. When I opened the checking account, I said, "Are you going to give me checks? Oh, do you want checks?" And I'm just being old-fashioned. I thought, well, I think I might need some checks.
Yeah.
But there was a statement made by a former Commissioner Werfel. I think it was at his 1-year anniversary of speaking at American University. He says, modernizing the IRS is a generational imperative. I thought, yeah, that's an interesting way to describe it, because you're serving, obviously the IRS has to serve all generations that are out there.
Right.
And, government data would show that, about 9-10% of folks don't really use the internet, but certainly the expectations of, I think not just younger generation, but many people would be, yeah, what do you mean I've got to mail something? Now, sometimes actually the Internal Revenue Code requires a physical mailing of something. So Congress needs to modernize to give other options to all their government agencies that they can do things digitally. But I think people would want to interact with the IRS just like they would interact with their bank, with Amazon, any company they're dealing with.
Their phone.
So often you just go online and take care of it. You don't have to be making a phone call and wait for somebody to call you back. Yeah. And you're right. The IRS has certainly been doing a lot of those improvements, but they've got about the largest customer base of anybody out there, because, everybody is a customer.
Everybody is their customer
of the IRS. So they've got a much bigger job. And certainly the security concerns of many government agencies are quite significant.
And the bandwidth too, hiring. I mean, there's no a hiring freeze, but having the right people doing the job correctly is no easy, task for the
hiring them and
IRS.
training them properly, getting them
Yeah.
trained, and again, that whole idea of we can, if I hear one more time that there's 87,000 armed agents floating around out there,
Right.
instead of realizing some of those people answer the phone, some of those people do, process the returns, and they're not all running around with guns.
Very few
makes it hard.
Very few are in the criminal investigation division.
Right. I mean, that's where they are. If they're in if they're not in criminal investigation, I don't think the person answering your phone sitting there with a pistol on their desk, we've got to get to where we've got to have people and technology to do things. And now, again, in the real world, we're potentially in a hiring freeze. I even think I read that they were rescinding some offers that had already been made.
Yep.
They're offering, I guess you call it, I don't know if it's early, I don't know what to call it, but basically if you accept the offer, September 30th, you leave the government. I don't know. I didn't see the IRS being exempted from that. So I'm assuming IRS people are now being told that if you want to leave, we'll give you pay through September 30th and then you're out of here. And in a time when I think they need to add people, they could be losing people. And couple that with the whole back to work, and you got union contracts for some of the people that work in the IRS. Some don't have union contracts. How many people are you going to lose because they're not going to make an hour commute 5 days a week or something? It's going to be an interesting time at the IRS because money and people are important to any company or any agency, but I think particularly at the IRS, and I think right now we don't really know where it's going to go. We don't even have a full-time commissioner yet, and they bring their own, and I'm saying this, and then I'll leave you time to comment because I'm off on a tangent here. Any commissioner brings their own personal, feelings and priorities into the agency, and I personally, I don't even know the person that's been put up for the commissioner. I haven't run anybody that really does, other than people who say he's a nice guy. So I don't know. Interesting times at the IRS, and I know they're nervous.
Right. Well, reports over the years, like I think GAO, I guess even IRS strategic operating plans have said they've got lots of retirements. So as a college professor, I mean, I've known for a long time, we really didn't even mention the possibility of working at the IRS because they just really weren't hiring. And students, there's kind of like a grapevine of where opportunities are for employment, and the IRS just hadn't been talked about. But certainly in the last year or two, yes, I think a lot of students are well aware. Yeah, good jobs available at the IRS. They were doing active hiring, and needed to bring in folks because of not having been able to do adequate hiring for so many years. Plus, it just takes a while to get back in the groove of campus career centers say, "Oh yeah, the IRS they hire." But yeah, I would guess if anybody at any place was offered, "Hey, you're maybe close to retirement, or you got other opportunities elsewhere, and you can get 8 months pay." And of course, we're talking about, I guess, a recent executive order or something from President Trump.
Right.
And it may or may not be legal. Who knows if it's legal? We don't have any idea. But it's out there.
I mean, it's going to be tempting for any people either because they're close to retirement, or it's like, yeah, I got other job opportunities out there. I'm, well-skilled person.
So if you got people leaving on the front end and you can't replace them on the back end, eventually the system is, and you don't have the money to invest in technology to take their places or refigure some sort of product or service with technology. I think there's the potential that the service could be going through some difficult times in the next couple of years. If this now, none of this may happen. Let's understand this is all speculation at this point. But if all of those things were to happen, we cut back on hiring, we give people that are already there an easy way out, and we don't fund technology, then we're going to continue to expect the IRS to function, and it's going to be harder for them. And that's going to come back on us as tax professionals or taxpayers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Right, and because we've been through that before.
Yeah. We're used to it.
Yeah.
Annie may not. She's younger than us, but we've been through it. and looks like we may be going through it again. All right, let's maybe we're getting too deep into the current environment and the politics here. Let's get back to the report. Annie, what do you want to talk about next from the report?
Let's talk about. We mentioned the online accounts, and that was helpful. But what else is sort of like at looking forward, or like voice bots? Like I know the business online accounts are starting to rev up.
What did IRSAC think was the most important thing?
Yeah, and to encourage you to look at the report, there's actually 4 reports that deal with something about online accounts. One was just maybe just you need more promotion so people are aware that they can go, you have to go through ID.me, and then you can go activate your online account. It just things I've read and statements made by former Commissioner Werfel was that would be the future of the IRS. Just like, if you want to deal with your bank, you log into your account and you can do all kinds of things. I think that was what they were talking about in the strategic operating plan. So they are very important, but people need to know they can form these and be able to do something. And I think when the tax professionals were told, hey, you can manage your powers of attorney there, that was, wow, okay, that's fantastic. I better go open that. That sounds like a good thing. So finding ways to promote it, making sure, that expected tech advice is there. Gee, I got a problem. If you log into, I bought some product and this got a question about it, you log into the website. Usually a chat thing pops up right away. Did you want to chat about it and take care of it? So they need to be aware of what, people are used to outside of government dealing with private enterprise. The report also includes a list of things that people would probably like to see in the business online account, and then discussion about for the business online accounts. That's an added challenge beyond what an individual is, because some big company, who is the designated official? Who are the designated users? How does the IRS
taxpayer data
they're not violating disclosure rules, and it gets more
privacy and everything else?
Yeah, I think if people want to know more about that, I think the background and the recommendations, that part of the report is interesting. But I think people have to realize in your regular everyday life, how many times are you logging on to do something? Wouldn't you want maybe all the government agencies you deal with to have something similar? And some do, certainly, but governments don't always get the same funding as private industry.
Yeah, Andy can speak to it better than I can. We've gone a long way to encouraging our people to encourage their clients to set up the online accounts, because it makes our job much easier. If we need something, I think they're not perfect, but I think they're really good and a great place to go to do certain things and certainly get information. I know, Annie, we've run into
make payments, change estimates, get a document you lost. I think they're up to 5 years of comparable information that can be found in there. Offer and compromise. If I like it just for the fact that the scammers are so good, right? So just knowing you got an IRS notice, clients are like, "Is it real? Is this this?" And if you go into your online account, then you can see if that notice is sitting in that account or not.
Right. Just like you get the email, your Amazon account has been closed.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you can quickly check it's a bogus one, because suddenly you log into your account and see that that's not
everything's fine, right?
Yeah. I would just, as a professor, just watching technology, I would guess it would just keep on growing. And just one example that comes to mind, I talk about it and do a lot of update presentations. The IRS came out with a new form to make an 83B election, where before 83B election, just write it on a piece of paper, mail it off. But now there's a form 15620, which you can fill out online, print it off, because you still have to mail it in. But I would guess that's an example of, at some point, I would guess you just be able to log into your online account, want to make an 83B election, form pops up, fill it out, hit submit, done, and it's noted in your account. Yes, this is the day you filed this 83B election. Anybody at the IRS or you can always look at it. Because I think that's what people would expect. I mean, I know it's what my students would expect. Isn't that the way I would do this? What do you mean I got to go find an envelope?
Fantastic.
What's an envelope?
Yeah. And chat, you mentioned chat. I was at a briefing last week, and they've added chat, in the collection department, where now you can schedule your appointment by using a chat box. And instead of having to call some number and stay on hold or hope, you can go through a chat box now and say, hey, this is my issue. When can we chat? When can we not chat? but actually
schedule the
talk.
appointment. Yeah.
So, I mean, they're making strides, and I think that's kind of what IRSAC and all of us want them to do. We want them to continue to get more like what we deal with every day
Absolutely.
with every other company that we deal with. I used to jokingly tell people, the IRS can send me a letter, give me a phone number to call and supposedly a person to talk to, and they have no idea when I call, why I'm calling, what the issue is,
Exactly.
or whatever. But I can call my pizza place down the street who didn't know I was going to call, and they can tell me where I live, what my last pizza was, and how long it'll take to get it to me.
Right.
So can we at least get our technology at the IRS as good as the pizza joint
pizza
down the
place.
street?
The pizza place has you all recorded by your phone number.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And so they know everything. And yet I'm calling you because you told me to call you. And nobody knows who I am or why am I calling you. And that's the kind of experience that frustrates people when they see such a disconnect between how they interact day in and day out. And then when it comes to dealing with their tax agency, it's like, well, we don't know.
And of course, other things to consider is that, the IRS has everybody is its customer. Your pizza place has a limited clientele.
Yeah, there's a few more customers.
The IRS has greater concerns because your pizza place probably doesn't have your social security number, where the IRS has a lot of personal information for you. And then of course the IRS has to deal with everybody. I mean, that pizza parlor, if you see businesses, for example, say, hey, we don't take cash anymore. Okay, that's fine with them. But I mean, the IRS has to take, everyone to pay us cash or whatever, we got to
get paid.
Right. You don't use the internet. We still have to be able to serve you. So, realizing that basically all government agencies, particularly the IRS,
there are hurdles for sure.
Be serving everybody and capable of doing that, which is added challenges of making sure they can do all that.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit, because I know this is something that's been in the report for a while, and I know it's kind of near and dear to a lot of people in our profession. Two things as it relates to practitioners. Number one, IRSAC, I think, recommended that EAs be able to take some CPE courses that aren't tax related, more practice management, kind of putting them on par with CPAs in terms of the kind of education they could do.
Professional development, those kinds of things.
And then secondly, the whole idea of some sort of minimum standards registration or something of the people who prepare taxes. Can you talk a little bit about those two areas, what IRSAC found and why they're making those suggestions, and then we can speculate as to whether anything will ever happen.
The one on the practice management, I mean, if you look at actually even what the curriculum is at the IRS nationwide forums, and Roger, you present on these things, they're practice management, but it doesn't count for enrolled agents. At the university, our MST program is a IRS certified provider, and I always have to catch, this is a very important topic, but it might not count for EA credit. We had a section on artificial intelligence, a free webinar for our friends, and that won't count for. I don't think it would count for EA credit on that. But suggesting that obviously things that are very important to effective tax practice, everything from understanding how you keep all your records, how you find clients, how you decide maybe certain clients shouldn't be there. Anything that fall very broadly under practice management, the IRSAC report suggests why not allow, it's optional, up to 4 hours of the total 72 to be practice management courses. Because, obviously, and actually attorneys often have things similar to that, practice management. Why not for the enrolled agents? And still even at 72 hours or even 68 hours of technical education. I'm sure many of them get far more than that. It didn't seem to be. It's
far-fetched. This is a good idea.
Yeah. Well, and if you look, they just proposed some changes to Circular 230, and a lot of those changes are more practice management driven than tax technical. It's talking about things like data security, it's succession planning, it's what to do if you're mentally impaired, and all of
being
those.
Familiar with technology, there was a lot of stuff in there about technology and competence.
Expanded to include technology competence,
right.
So if all of that's important enough to be part of Circular 230, why shouldn't we be able to take a course to improve us in those areas as part of our requirement each year to practice before the IRS. So hopefully that will get some traction and some attention, because it's there's more to being good in the tax world than just knowing the tax law. Obviously, that's the most important thing. You got to know the law and you got to know how to do the return, but you got to know how to run a business, protect the data, inform clients, what to do when certain things come up that, aren't necessarily tax related. And so hopefully I was very happy to see that in the proposal.
Yeah, it is very important. I mean, I run a graduate tax program where it's mostly accountants or some of the people changing careers. But one of the things I hand out to them at orientation, I hand them a book about emotional intelligence, and we have discussion about it and I ask them questions like, you have to give your client some bad news about how something works, and they're going to get really mad at you. Oh, what do you do? Because it is important, effective.
Absolutely.
And managing expectations and a whole host of things to be an effective tax practitioner. We also talk about, career. How do you plan your career? Because you could have all this tax knowledge, but if you can't fully utilize it for your own benefit and your clients or your employer, you haven't gotten the full picture, right?
No. No. What about the whole idea of I know we had a bill or a plan from the IRS, it's not a bill, to regulate return preparers. And then we had the Loving case, and that went away. And certain states are regulating, but not the federal government. IRSAC came out in favor of doing something in that area. What kind of brought it on? And is there a specific recommendation, or just do it?
No, actually, since IRSAC recommendations are directed to the IRS, where another advisory group in the IRS, ETAC, Electronic Tax Advisory, is actually directed to recommendations to Congress. And ETAC, I think every year for recent years has had, make a statutory change to allow the IRS to regulate return preparers. I know National Taxpayer Advocate makes the recommendation, and past IRSAC reports at times had made, in fact, in 2018, I think it was the most recent time where IRSAC had said that they encouraged IRS, I think, to recommend that Congress, make this change. So what this IRSAC report has is, well, those recommendations have been made for some time, but nothing seems to happen. And is there something maybe the IRS could do to perhaps bring more folks into being subject to Circular 230? I mean, they have, after the Lawson and Loving decision, which, over 10 years ago now.
Right.
And of course, the proposed Circular 230 will finally pull the registered tax return preparer out of that, which is, 10 years outdated there. That they went to this annual filing season program, where they do have some Circular 230. I mean, they're subject to Circular 230 as part of your agreement that you will be in this voluntary program. You've taken the requisite course, taken 100 questions,
take a test.
It's all the annual filing season program. What IRSAC was suggesting in the report was, why not further, actually replace it with something we suggested called a filing season agent. And they would have to take two parts, the individual and the ethics part of the enrolled agent exam. They'd be subject to fewer contingency hours. And then they would, something else regarding practitioners, I don't think it's always widely known, is that what are your practice rights? I mean, enrolled agent, attorney, CPA can represent anybody before the IRS, whether or not they're prepared to return. The voluntary program person can represent someone if they're prepared to return. The other people can't represent anybody. So we were just thinking maybe of something if it was maybe a little more formalized. And of course, then if someone wanted to become the enrolled agent, they would just have to take the third part of the test, and they would move on and have greater practice rights from the filing season agent. But basically what IRSAC is getting at, read that part of the report, is there anything the IRS can do? Because there's plenty of recommendations. In fact, actually, I know this just from reading many things in my career. The President Trump's budget years ago had a proposal to regulate return preparers. President Biden's budget had a proposal to regulate return preparers. Well, if you've got two presidents that supported it and still no change,
nothing happened. Yeah.
Is there something that the IRS could do to bring more into coverage under Circular 230 with some required education element there?
Yeah, anything's better than what we have, and I think the taxpayer advocate is in her report to Congress for years has recommended this. And, it's just, again, at some point, it seems like common sense. There's so many other professions that are regulated, and yet somehow tax preparation is not.
Yeah,
right.
And I think a lot of our clients probably think we're all regulated to some extent.
That's right. They probably would think that. And of course, the law is so complicated. But
yeah.
I mean,
we're not born with this.
We have kind of education.
To go to college and have to go take courses and try to do this. It's not like we just wake up one day and we know everything to do a tax return properly. All right, we're running. This has been great. We're about to run out of time. Annie, what else do we need to touch on before we wrap it up?
There are some new forms out there as it relates to digital currency. Hopefully, I know there's still a need for regulating that whole cryptocurrency, digital assets environment. But with additional forms coming out, I think it'll, although it keeps getting so complicated that the forms are going to have to change. And I don't even know all the terms related to cryptocurrency. But anything on that front before we wrap up for the day?
One of the subgroups that IRSAC has, which actually used to be its own separate advisory group, was information reporting, and just credible expertise there. But IRSAC does issue a annual report in November, but it can also, where it has recommendations that are needed earlier, like when the 1099 DA first was released earlier in 2024, they wanted comments by a certain date, and so IRSAC did submit comments on that. And that letter is actually, there were 7 comment letters actually in the appendix that went off earlier than the November report. But in case people aren't aware, it's not an IRSAC item, but in regulations that all tie to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act that was enacted in November 2021, one of the pay-fors was to bring in broker reporting for digital assets. And it's a very complicated project. I can spend a lot of time in the digital asset space for a variety of reasons. We're running our second annual blockchain tax conference at the through our MST program, where it's just the complexity in the area is quite immense. But yes, 1099 reporting actually starts 1/1/25. So there are going to be people who, for the very first time,
they've never seen before,
DA likely in January, February of next year. That's going to raise a good number of questions by practitioners and all that, because the 1099 DA, it's not going to report all transactions. The first ones aren't going to have any basis information on them. Even later ones might not have basis information on it. It's a fairly complicated area and seems to get, I think it's more complicated every day just because of the types of transactions that change on a regular basis.
Yeah, we did a podcast with a gentleman who's smartest guy I've ever heard talking about cryptocurrency. And I can say for the whole hour, I'm not sure I understood half of what he was talking about. I mean, it was just, it's just so complicated and so many wallets and this and that. And
it's tough. It's almost, a lot of the firms have, somebody or multiple people where their full-time activity, they're just spending it on
specialize that. Yep.
Yeah, you get that question on the tax return, did you sell any crypto? And you just hope you can answer no.
Well, I tell people, I do a lot of these presentations, I'm pretty sure you all have at least one client with digital assets.
Whether you know it or not.
Whether you know, exactly.
That's right, whether you know it or not.
Wow.
Well, we didn't get near through the list of things so we got to get you back, Annette. We didn't, but this has been great. I want to thank you a lot for doing this.
Well, my pleasure. I hope people, just learn a little bit more about IRSAC. And of course, we talked about a lot of topics beyond IRSAC, but any of the reports, I think, are always good background reading.
Oh, yeah. No, it's always, there's in all the reports, it may not be 100% relevant to you, but I guarantee you there's a lot of stuff in there that would
it is interesting.
Be relevant to you if you're in this industry and in any level. And we will have to get you back because I'm looking at my list and I think we got through like 3 of 12 or something. So we
would love to have you back.
Well, Roger and Annie be glad to come back. Always like to talk about.
And you're back on IRSAC for the rest of the year. So who knows what you'll find out. You're going to be on the front lines of a challenging year, I think, for the IRS.
For certain.
Any final thoughts or comments?
I've enjoyed this, and I do hope that we can get you back sooner than later. And thank you so much for your time. And thank you to our listeners. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. And that's all I have for today.
Annette, thank you. Thanks all you for listening. Hope you'll be back for another Federal Tax Update podcast. Bye, everyone.